Welcome to the Marketing Behind Rapid Growth, the podcast where we explore the strategies, decisions, and growth engines behind some of the world's most successful technology companies. Today, we're talking about Clearbit. Here's a question worth sitting with. What happens when the smartest people at a company decide to give their best work away for free? Most executives would call that insane, a giveaway, a margin killer. But for one small team of engineers, giving things away for free wasn't a mistake. It was the entire growth strategy. And it worked so well that it built a company sophisticated enough to be swallowed whole by HubSpot for $150 million. This is the story of Clearbit, a company that treated marketing not as a department, but as a form of engineering. And it starts, like a lot of great B2B stories do, with one person's very specific, very personal frustration. Act 1. The itch that started everything. Picture the early 2000s. If you worked in sales or marketing and you needed to know who was actually behind an email address, your options were bleak. You could spend 30 minutes doing a manual Google search, or you could buy a CSV file from some data broker, a file that was probably stitched together by a cron job and was already 6 months stale by the time it landed in your inbox. B2B data at the time was a dirty word, literally and figuratively. Alex McCaw knew this pain better than most. He'd cut his teeth as an engineer at Twitter and at Stripe, two companies obsessed with clean, elegant infrastructure. And at Stripe, despite being surrounded by some of the best technical minds in the industry, he ran into a wall. Even a company as sophisticated as Stripe struggled to get real-time, high-quality data on its own customers. The market at the time was built for giants. Fortune 500 companies got white-glove data services. Everyone else, the fast-growing, scrappy internet companies, was left completely in the dark. McCaw had a simple but radical insight. Data shouldn't arrive as a file you download and immediately watch grow stale. Data should be a utility, something you call like a light switch, and it just works. In 2015, he launched a product called API Hub. 5 clean REST APIs. Feed it an email address or a domain, and it would hand back a person's name, their job title, their social handles, or a company's employee count and its entire technology stack. Now, at the time, this was a risky bet in more ways than one. Y Combinator and top-tier VCs were famously skeptical of single-founder companies, and the conventional wisdom said an engineer simply couldn't sell into the enterprise. B2B sales meant steak dinners with CIOs. It meant relationship building and procurement cycles. McCaw ignored that playbook entirely. Instead, he built a try-before-you-buy experience. A developer could sign up with a credit card, hit an API, and watch clean data flow back in seconds. No sales call required. The product sold itself, one curious engineer at a time. Act 2. When marketing becomes the engineering roadmap. Here's where the story gets genuinely interesting, because Clearbit's early growth wasn't just about clever code sitting behind an API. Underneath the product, sure, there was real technical muscle, machine learning and web scraping systems pulling from over 200 live data sources. But what actually put Clearbit on the map wasn't the sophistication of the backend. It was a handful of brilliantly engineered giveaways. The first was something called the Logo API. Internally, it had been a small utility, a tool that converted a company's domain into a clean logo image. Clearbit took that tool and gave it away, completely free to anyone who wanted it. There was just one condition. Use it, and you had to link back to Clearbit. This is a masterstroke worth pausing on. It wasn't just a nice utility for developers. It was functionally an SEO engine. Companies as large as PayPal and Spotify started using the Logo API, and every single implementation created a high-quality backlink pointing straight back to Clearbit. The compounding effect was enormous. Clearbit began ranking at the very top of Google for practically any B2B data keyword you could search. They weren't buying that visibility. They were engineering it, one free tool at a time. The second masterstroke came a bit later, and it's arguably even more elegant. When LinkedIn acquired a popular email finding tool called Rapportive and then gutted it, an entire market was left with nowhere to go. Clearbit's team, at the time just 8 people, saw the opening and built something better. Clearbit Connect, a Gmail extension that let anyone find a corporate email address without ever leaving their inbox. They gave it away for free, and hundreds of thousands of users signed up. But notice what was really happening underneath the surface. This wasn't just a lead generation funnel. Every time a user flagged a piece of incorrect data or corrected an entry, they were, without realizing it, training and improving Clearbit's entire database. It was crowdsourced data accuracy, disguised as a free productivity tool. This is the core lesson of Clearbit's early years. Marketing wasn't downstream of the product. Marketing was a form of research and development. The free tools didn't just acquire users, they generated a feedback loop that shaped what Clearbit built next. Act 3. From selling primitives to selling outcomes. By 2017, Clearbit ran into the ceiling that a lot of developer-first companies eventually hit. Developers loved the APIs. They were clean, they were fast, they were a joy to integrate. But the actual budget, the real pain, lived somewhere else entirely. It lived with sales and marketing teams. And those teams had no idea what an API key even was. This is where Matt Sorensen enters the story. An ex-founder who joined Clearbit in a growth role and would later become CEO, Sorensen led a fundamental repositioning. Instead of selling raw primitives, Clearbit needed to start selling outcomes. The method they used to figure out what those outcomes should be is worth remembering. They watched their most resourceful customers. They looked at what people were quietly building on top of the raw APIs, the workarounds and hacks customers had cobbled together themselves, and then Clearbit simply productized those hacks. When they noticed customers using the data to personalize websites in real time, Clearbit built Reveal, a tool that could identify anonymous website visitors just from their IP address. When they noticed marketers struggling to target the right accounts on social platforms, Clearbit built something they called Clearbit X. It let B2B companies build what amounted to God mode audiences on Facebook, targeting by company, size, and technology stack in ways Facebook's native tools simply couldn't do. This was a calculated risk, and it's worth naming clearly. By moving into this application layer, Clearbit stopped being a neutral background data provider. They started competing directly with some of the very CRMs and marketing platforms they'd built integrations for. But the payoff justified the risk. Average contract values jumped from around $12,000 to over $25,000. Clearbit had found its way into the mid-market and the enterprise. Act 4. The courage to say no. By the time Clearbit reached $50 million in annual recurring revenue, they ran into a different kind of problem. One that's much harder to diagnose because on the surface, everything looked fine. Growth was healthy. The top line kept climbing. But in 2020, they conducted a hard internal audit, and what they found was uncomfortable. 86% of their long-term revenue was coming from just 18% of their leads. And think about the implication of that number for a moment. It means that the overwhelming majority of their sales and marketing effort, something like 82% of it, was being poured into customers who would likely never even recoup the cost of acquiring them. Most SaaS companies never confront this truth because it's uncomfortable to act on. The instinct is always to chase more leads, more logos, more top-line growth. Clearbit did something much harder. They redefined their ideal customer profile, not around who was easiest to close, but around lifetime value. They narrowed their focus specifically to B2B SaaS companies already using tools like HubSpot or Marketo. They stopped chasing every lead in the funnel and started focusing on what they called the bow tie model. The idea that the real value of a customer isn't the initial sale, it's everything that happens after, the renewals and the expansion revenue. This is intellectual honesty in action. It's the willingness to look at a healthy-looking growth chart and say, most of this isn't actually working, and have the discipline to walk away from it. Act 5. The melting iceberg. If narrowing the ICP was Clearbit's most disciplined moment, what came next was its most existential. By 2023, large language models had arrived, and Matt Sorensen realized something unsettling. The complex, expensive data pipelines Clearbit had spent 8 years and millions of dollars engineering were quietly becoming obsolete. Tasks that used to require hundreds of manual researchers and painstakingly built algorithms could now be done by an LLM in seconds. Sorensen had a phrase for what was happening. He called Clearbit a melting iceberg. The water around them was warming, and the old way of doing things was dissolving in real time. Sorensen had returned to lead the company after a period under outside management, and what he did next was a genuine display of organizational courage. In just 3 to 4 months, Clearbit rebuilt its entire data pipeline from the ground up using AI. The results were immediate and dramatic. Coverage and accuracy improved sharply. And for the first time, Clearbit could enrich company and contact data in any language, in any geography, anywhere in the world. That technical renewal did more than just save the company from irrelevance. It turned Clearbit from a melting iceberg into one of the most attractive acquisition targets in the data space. Act 6. The batteries included CRM. The acquisition, when it came in the late 2023, wasn't a surprise ending. It was the culmination of a relationship nearly a decade in the making. HubSpot had been a Clearbit customer and partner for years, and the two companies shared a core belief. Data should live where the actual work happens. For HubSpot, buying Clearbit filled in the last major piece of a much bigger vision, building the world's first batteries-included CRM. By folding 20 million company records and 500 million decision-maker profiles directly into HubSpot's unified customer record, they could offer something no competitor could match. Total intelligence, from the very first day. A brand new HubSpot customer no longer starts with an empty database. They start with a fully enriched map of their entire addressable market, already built in. Closing, what this story actually teaches. So what do we take from Clearbit, beyond the fact that it's a great story? 3 things stand out. First, marketing can function as research and development. Clearbit didn't build free tools like the Logo API and Connect simply to promote what they'd already made. Those tools actively shaped what they built next, while quietly generating one of the most efficient acquisition funnels in B2B software. Second, the best products are often hiding in plain sight, inside your customers' workarounds. Some of Clearbit's most valuable features weren't dreamed up in a strategy offsite. They came from watching customers hack together solutions with the tools they already had, and then simply building that solution properly. And third, and maybe hardest of all, real growth sometimes requires the courage to get smaller on purpose. Clearbit's decision to walk away from 82% of their funnel wasn't a retreat. It was the exact move that turned a fast-growing startup into a durable, high-margin business worth acquiring. Alex McCaw once said that the next generation of innovation comes from improvements to basic infrastructure. Clearbit's whole story is proof of that idea. They didn't just sell data. They rebuilt the infrastructure underneath how B2B growth actually works. This was the marketing behind rapid growth. See you in the next episode.